everyone, and welcome into this very special edition of Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is Dog Nation's recruiting insider, Jeff Sintel. I say special edition for a unique reason. Normally, we come to you live every Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Well, if you're watching this, it is Wednesday, and it is 3 p.m., but we are not live. Jeff Sintel, as we speak, is on his way to parts unknown for a vacation. So Jeff was good enough to come in on Tuesday afternoon. We were able to do some recruiting talk so we can present Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, in its normal time slot. We'll be back again with a live version of the show again next week. Jeff Sintel will be a part of that. And then 2 weeks from now, we'll be back in the official all-hands-on-deck format at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays for Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. So Jeff, thanks for making some time with us before you get away for vacation, and a lot to discuss on today's show. Later on, we'll hear from a recruiting target of very interesting note, Theo Johnson, the four-star from Canada. How does he feel about the Dogs, and how does he feel about some other programs? We'll deal with that. We'll check in on our top targets as always, and there is some movement there this week for some rather interesting reasons, which we'll discuss. But off the top, Jeff, you had a chance to catch up with Jalen Kimber, the very impressive UGA commit, the defensive back, and boy, Kimber had a lot to say, did he not?
It was funny, guys. So Kimber, I'm talking to him, and before the event, he's like, "Man, I wish I had some Georgia gloves. I wish I could have some Georgia gloves to wear." Hours later, like squiggly lines, doodle-doop, 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 you see him at a 97-degree sweltering Woodward Academy pylon National 7-on-7 Championships. What to my wandering eye appear but a pair of Georgia gloves on Jalen Kimber? This guy says he's done. He's already taken his official visit. I doubt he will take any more. And we had an interesting conversation.
So let's take a look at that right now. Another name that comes up in this discussion, Kelee Ringo. What does Jalen Kimber have to say to Ringo? We'll find that out, and why it was that Kimber chose the Bulldogs. Here on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, a great interview. Jeff Sintel with UGA commit Jalen Kimber. Take a look at it right now.
Jalen Kimber, first off, I guess it's an easy question. Looking back on your decision, what do you think was the biggest reason why you chose Georgia?
I felt most comfortable there with all the coaches and Coach Kirby, and I just felt like that's the best place for me. I liked Athens, and I just felt like it was the best fit for me too, and like their scheme and their system and stuff like that.
You know, this is probably the time of year where everybody comes around and starts kicking the tires on your commitment. Oh, is he sure? Can we get a visit? Can we talk to him? How do you handle all that stuff right now? Are you still looking, or you feel like you're shut down?
I feel like I'm shut down, really. I just tell him I don't know what I'm going to do. I just say I just talk with my dad and see what we're going to do, but then I also talk to my coach about it, and then just make sure I'm 100% sure with them. But really, I'm just really 100% committed to Georgia. So.
When's the next time you visit Athens?
Probably in the summer. I'm going to do a little camp with them. So just work out with coaches and stuff like that, just to get back down there and see everything.
You will enroll early, correct?
Yeah, I leave. I decided in December, but I leave in January.
So you got a game in mind you're going to come down to see this fall?
Yeah, I think it might be the Notre Dame one or the Texas A&M. Probably the Texas A&M one though.
Describe your game. If you had to, look on the back of your Madden card or whatever, and it had to break down what Jalen does well and strengths and weaknesses, how would you describe your game?
Very technical. Go with my feet, go with my hands, go with my speed. And I just like to play man to man. I like to be up in somebody's face, but I don't have no problem playing zone too. So I just like being technical and being up in somebody's face.
Tell me about the best play on your highlight tape.
Best play on my highlight tape was probably I had slammed somebody. I knew the play was coming, and it was a bubble screen. So number 2 was like far off the ball, number 1 was on, and number 3 was up. And I just knew it was coming, so I didn't backpedal or nothing. I just shot through, and I kind of picked him up and slammed him.
Physical guy. Huh?
Yeah, it was kind of one of my favorite plays.
So here's the paradox you see, people. Folks out there, they probably know a little bit about Jalen, how those people call him twitchy. He's good size, about 6'1", 170. I think he went 4.40 on the laser at the opening testing. He went 4.00 on the short shuttle. So they're like, okay, this is a guy that can run around and cover and be fast, dude. It just seems by those last few answers that you're more of a physical guy. You like to get up in somebody's grill, right?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that because at camps I don't like to. You see a lot of people like try to choke somebody or jam them. At camps, I like to show that I'm technical. I can play off. I can use my feet instead of my hands. So I usually like to use my hands and stuff during games or like real pass situations. Because like when you're not in pads, you have to work on other things than just your hands. Because your feet are more valuable than your hands when you play corner at the line of scrimmage and stuff like that. So
I'm sure you've been coached up immensely. Do you find yourself falling back to one piece of advice that's maybe the foundation of the way you play football? Is there anything about the technical aspects of the corner position that you live and breathe by?
This technique, really. This is my coach, Clay Mackey, just says your feet is everything. Like, without your feet, you can't really do much. So, like, when he told me how to press, your feet have to move first before your hands, because if you move your hands first, your feet get stuck in the mud, then you can get beat off the line. So stuff like that, I try to think about all the time whenever I'm pressing or stuff like that. So
you're a Bulldog now.
Yeah.
I see you pretty active on social media. What do you think your role is now as a commitment? Is that to be ambassador of the program? Is that to encourage other guys? What do you think your role is now as a kind of a lockdown commitment?
Just to get the best recruiting class we can. I want to have the #1 recruiting class, and I talk to a lot of people. I like to interact with some of the fans and stuff like that because I think it's fun and I like to do it. But I'm just trying to get the best players we can possible. One of my friends, Miles Slusher, just got the Georgia offer. I'm trying to get one of my friends, AJ Henning from Chicago, not offer, but to commit. So I'm just trying to talk to people, just to tell them that Georgia's the place to be, and we can probably win a natty soon.
What do you tell those guys? What do you say? Do you have a speech, or did you just flow?
I just go with the flow, really. I just pick their brains, and then to see what they say, and I just go off of that, really.
And then you have an answer for all their moves, right?
Yes, I have an answer.
What did the Georgia coaches see in you?
They just like my character, how I'm a high-class kid. They like my length, they like my speed, they like I can play inside or outside. And they just like me as a kid, really, and just see how good of a player that I could be if I went to them and get into the program. And the thing I like about Georgia is Coach Warren, he's a technician. He likes technique kids, and that's what he sees in me, and that's what type of player I am. So
4 DBs or 3 DBs?
I think it's two other. He wants 2 other ones.
2 more ones. So,
yeah.
So there's you right now, and then there's I think there's just you right now.
Yeah.
Officially, who's on your wish list about who Georgia needs to finish out the class in DBs?
Well, right now, I'm really working on getting Kelee. That's what I'm really trying to get right now. I haven't seen or reached out to anybody else in the corner, but right now, I'm really trying to get Kelee Ringo.
Why does Georgia need a Kelee Ringo besides the ratings and the speed and the game and all that? What makes you think we need that guy?
Keelee's a lockdown, physical, big corner, and he can run too. I think he ran the 100-meter like 10.4 also. I think, and he can run. Like, he's not slow. He's rangy, big, and he's just something I think that Georgia can use.
So at the end of that discussion there, you hear Jalen Kimber say, I'm really trying to get Kelee Ringo, and that's been the hallmark of recruiting in that Kirby Smart era, is that guys don't shy away from other elite players in their position groups. They actually want that as much as possible. The guys that have fit in well at Georgia have been very comfortable with deep position groups, and Jalen Kimber, not only is he not shying away from a guy like Kelee Ringo joining him as part of this 2020 class, he's actively trying to make sure that happens. I think that speaks well of Kimber. I think it speaks well of the atmosphere that Georgia's building around its program right now.
Yeah, I think the thing that, you even heard Jalen Kimber kind of mention that in that interview, is that the number's 3, which means 2 more defensive backs, and obviously Georgia fans, especially this guy right here, would love to see Kelee Ringo become one of those remaining 2 targets in the defensive secondary for Georgia. So who's that left? Is that the big safety? That's kind of what I think it is. It's maybe a thumper at safety. Remember, Georgia only signed 3 defensive backs total last year. 2 corners, DJ Daniel, Tyreek Stevenson, Kelee Ringo. I mean, in the last cycle, it was Daniel Stevenson and then Lewis Seen. So there's only 3 total DBs in that class. And then in 2019, if they only take 3, that's only 6 in 2 years. Remember those early Kirby years where Georgia was taking like 5, 6, 7 defensive backs every year?
There were a lot.
just trying to figure out what they want.
So obviously Kimber's a guy that kind of emerged on the scene pretty quickly, and for a lot of Georgia fans, since that April commitment, they've been playing catch-up, learning about this young man. Is there anything that most of us don't know about Kimber that we probably should?
Yeah, here's one for you. I mean, the young man's already went through a great little batch of adversity in his life. He's gone maybe over the last 3 or 4 months from the nation's number 24 corner to 16 to 15 to 11. I think he's now the nation's number 10 overall corner, and he's a top 150 player now for Georgia in the class. Basically, it's after a great resurgence for him as a junior. Brandon, his entire sophomore year was basically wasted, wiped off the board with back-to-back collarbone injuries. He broke a collarbone in spring practice, and then when he was ready to go the following fall, he re-broke that collarbone. 2 breaks to the same bone in about maybe 5 or 6 months, which basically eliminated his entire sophomore season. He rebounded with a great spring practice heading in his junior year, great camp work on campuses, and then a strong junior season, which led him to where he is today.
That is Jeff Sintel. My name is Brandon Adams. This is Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. Coming up in just a couple of moments, we will check in on our top 2020 targets list, and there is a change afoot with the top targets list this week. How do I know that? Because of events that happened over the course of the weekend. And we'll transition and talk a bit about that right now, because it was on this weekend, yesterday, in fact, Monday, I should say, when former five-star running back Marshawn Lloyd put out on Twitter that he had an announcement coming at 1 p.m. And that obviously got everybody's attention. I don't know that anybody quite expected, though, what was coming next. After Lloyd said he'd be dropping some important news at 1 p.m., a video appeared, and in that video, Marshawn Lloyd could be heard saying this. Take a listen.
I knew that this decision was going to be hard, but I never expected it to be this hard. I am very blessed and very grateful to all the schools that have shown me love, and with a lot of prayer and gut feeling, I know where I want to go. Go Gamecocks.
Look, I know I'm not the objective person sitting at this desk, but as objective as I can be following college football, if you take Georgia out of the equation, because obviously I would love for Lloyd to end up at Georgia, why South Carolina for Marshawn Lloyd? This is a program that has been inept running the football. Wouldn't that scare a guy like Lloyd off of a program?
Maybe it's just the best fit there for you, Brandon. I mean, this was a shocker. If everybody looks at those popular crystal balls from 24/7 Sports everybody wants to look at with Marshawn Lloyd, very rare in these times. If you still look at it right now as we're taping this show, 0 predictions for South Carolina. There's Georgia in there as the favorite. There's Penn State in there. There's a little bit of cloudy, but only like 9 to 10%. And then there's Maryland. I know a lot of Georgia fans. We saw it. I heard a fella named Brandon layman on his program, his daily program, the flagship. Kind of like what happened. And listen, folks, I just want people to realize how good things have been with Kirby Smart in Georgia. Normally the Bulldogs get all these guys, and this is like a random anomaly here where most of the time when you see the chatter, you see the trending, it looks like Georgia's going to end up getting their guy, especially a running back. But with Lloyd, it looks like he's on a different path right now, Brandon. You started to hear things, like it started to add up. No scavenger hunt visit, no G-Day visit, no visit during spring ball, when he did give some visits to South Carolina. Simply put, if you want to just chalk it up, looks like South Carolina went in harder, wanted Marshawn Lloyd more, made him feel like more of a priority. Brian McClendon, Thomas Brown, those guys know how to recruit. They know how to recruit running backs. They've done that for Georgia and score a very big win here for South Carolina. Is it over? See DJ Daniels, see Warren McClendon, see Devontae Wyatt. I don't think it's over, but I think this is a very interesting recruitment going forward. South Carolina trying to catch up with Georgia in the SEC East, trying to find just one of the Keith Marshall, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, DeAndre Swift, Zamir White types. Maybe they got one, because that was some pretty sporty film by Mr. Lloyd.
It's interesting to hear you say it's not over when it comes to Georgia's recruitment of Lloyd. We'll watch that. Sometimes surprise commitments have a way of not sticking. You've seen that a year ago. You mentioned DJ Daniel. You can also go back to the class of 2017. Different school, different position. Monty Rice, the surprise commitment to LSU, that had a way of not sticking there either. So maybe there are more twists and turns to come in Marshawn Lloyd's commitment. But for now, he is committed to the University of South Carolina. And Jeff, I think the big question in the mind of Georgia fans is, for a fan base that thought it was heading towards signing 2 elite backs in the 2020 cycle, does Lloyd's presence in Columbia, at least as a part of that class, does that injure Georgia's chances of getting two high caliber, high level backs as a part of the 2020 cycle?
Well, I don't think, Brandon, and recruiting is always very fluid. Everybody throws that term out when something unexpected happens. But guess what, folks? Unexpected things are supposed to happen when you cover these volatile young 17 and 18-year-old minds. I think right now the focus here is maybe Georgia fans need to redirect a little bit. Everyone's going to think about Kendall Lloyd a lot, and then the names will pop up. Kobe Pryor, Seth McGowan, Jace McClellan, Dejon Edwards down in Colquitt County and Moultrie. The names are there.
I notice you're not saying Tank Bigsby from Callaway. You're not saying Zachary Evans from Texas. Those are the names that a lot of our audience would rather hear you say here.
You'd rather hear them say that because they're the more highly rated guys. But Georgia's board doesn't go by the board that everybody clicks on and takes a really good look at. I think Georgia's going to be so thrifty with its 2020 class. Do they get an extra receiver? Do they get an extra linebacker? Do they get an extra offensive lineman? Do they get an extra DB? I don't see them going too far down their board to reach for a guy that maybe is not a guy that they feel is a Georgia RBU back, especially in a thrifty economy where they're trying to figure out how many guys they can take. I think Georgia fans should pay attention to a few things. A gangbuster season by DeAndre Swift means he will go pro. Brian Herring will show that a guy can show in and pop up in 1 year and have good stats behind that mammoth Georgia offensive line. Watch and see what James Cook does. Watch and see what Zamir White does. Watch and see what Kenny McIntosh does, because those last three names I mentioned are definitely likely going to be back for Georgia in 2020. Maybe Georgia only just needs that one back for 2020, because obviously this, Brandon, when you load up in 1 year, you hurt yourself in the next year. So if Georgia takes an extra back in 2020 just to say, oh yeah, we got two, then maybe it hurts them with a better talent in 2021.
Yeah, you only want the extra back if it's in the lead bag. But let me give you a chance to respond to something I said after you joined me on Dog Nation Daily on Tuesday, which is, for me, this is not an example of Georgia fans being entitled or greedy or wanting more than their fair share when it comes to players. This is a program that's trying to catch the two programs in front of it, Alabama and Clemson, for national championship. Georgia's not sitting back trying to win its sixth national championship. It's still scratching and clawing and fighting like mad to win its first. You can't lose elite players at positions you're supposed to dominate and get that done. So I know that Lloyd's from Maryland, but we've on this show targeted him to Georgia, at least as a strong possibility, a whole bunch of times. If Lloyd ends up in Columbia instead of UGA, even if Georgia gets Kendall Milton or some other elite back like that, that's a loss for Georgia.
Well, I can see why you see that, because everybody thinks Lloyd's our guy. Georgia has the lure and reputation to bring him in there. But the things I want to come back to is he didn't visit D-Day, didn't visit scavenger hunt, didn't visit for spring practice. So there was a pattern there. And he put out on social media that he basically wanted to focus on his track practices, as maybe that was a smoke screen or whatever. I think with Marshawn Lloyd to think about there, and you're talking about the race with the Titans, Clemson, and you're talking about Alabama there. I don't think Marshawn Lloyd, even 1 or 2 years down the road, is going to be the reason why Georgia catches or does not catch a Clemson or an Alabama. I think those players are already in place. I think the guys like Zamir White, I think guys like long-term, even a Kenny McIntosh and maybe a Kendall Milton, that would be the impetus towards reeling those guys in. Now, Marshawn Lloyd, one of the very best backs in the class of 2020, there's no doubt about that. But there's one thing to think about there. The Georgia fan that just goes, man, what happened? Think how Maryland feels. Think how Penn State feels. Those guys, despite the lure and grandeur of RBU in Georgia, you got to remember Saquon Barkley, Brandon. Saquon Barkley was trained by the same dude that trains Marshawn Lloyd. That state school right there is also wondering what happened there a little bit too, because if you think about it, if you're Penn State or Maryland and you're going to lose a Marshawn Lloyd talent to a school, Georgia makes sense. South Carolina maybe doesn't make sense.
That is Jeff Sintel. My name is Brandon Adams. It's Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. And speaking of Kroger, they got a great offer for you right now. You can get 3 times the fuel points on hundreds of items throughout the store, including Kroger ice cream, begging treats for your dogs. How about some Hershey's chocolate syrup? Make a little sundae. Have a little sundae out there on the front porch. That's not a bad idea. Red Bull, so much more. You can get it all at your local Kroger. Just look for those 3 times fuel points tags around the store to start saving. It's the perfect time with a lot of summer travel coming up, vacations coming up, including our own Jeff Sintel. It's a great chance to get away and save on a whole bunch of fuel points there at Kroger. All right, so big changes to our big board, our top 2020 targets. Marshawn Lloyd now presumably off that board. Let's take a look and see how the new board looks, our top targets for the class of 2020. And Jeff, you see right there, name number 1 on our list, the top targets for 2020. A guy that was there a week ago as well, the 5-star cornerback Kelee Ringo from Arizona, back on campus again for UGA recently. Jalen Kimber a moment ago had some words for Ringo, and Ringo's right back at the top of our list.
Yeah, it was interesting. Part of that interview you didn't see about Ringo is I asked Kimber, who considers himself to be a technician at cornerback, one of those guys that always wants his feet to go where his hands go first, breaking down what he thinks Kelee Ringo could be. And yeah, he noticed the size, he noticed the speed in the 100, 10.49 seconds. But he just liked the way technically that Kelee Ringo plays the game, goes about his business, and he would love to play with him at Georgia. He's number one, guys. I think he'll stay there for number one for a while because I think he's probably the best pure available football player with mutual interest between Georgia and also with Ringo and Georgia.
You still think he's the most committed, uncommitted prospect in the country?
I just laughed at all that. You know, everybody watched him do that, and it was a very astute Dog Nation reader, listener, viewer who made that comparison about, Malik Herring, is he this year's Kelee Ringo? The only thing that's different is with Kelee and Malik is Keelee's not in the state of Georgia. He's not. I remember whenever I was covering Malik and I was covering other guys at events, well, I would be talking recruiting with one of the guys who wasn't committed to Georgia yet, and Malik would come in the middle of the interview and he'd start barking, or he'd go dog. He would just basically go, he'd have a wristband that said the Georgia G on there and he'd dangle it in front of the interview or whatever. Well, Kelee can't do that stuff yet.
Name number 2 on our list, top targets for the class of 2020 here on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. Let's see who gets the second spot this week. It is the 5-star running back Kendall Milton from California. Another one of those guys that seemingly has been active, but there's been a lot of activity around him when it comes to Georgia on social media. But Milton's done his part on some of this too, including a couple things on Instagram here over the last couple of days. I think for Milton, you got to take a look at here. Let's go ahead and see one of those. Mikhail Sherman saying recruiting update with Kelee Ringo and Kendall Milton. So Kendall Milton and these guys clearly still having a good time, and you see the UGA uniform there as well.
Yeah, that's a different pose you've seen of Kendall right there. That's one that he didn't release on social media, but now he has on his Instagram account. It's actually in front of Sanford Stadium.
Good for him for wearing the red jersey, too. That is a classy guy right there. Not being swayed by all this new school black jersey stuff. Kendall Milton says, you know what? I'm a classic dog. I'm going to go red jersey, silver breeches, the same way Herschel would have worn it. That's my guy right there.
The other thing that's different about this, I hope folks notice the imagery here, is a lot of people don't take a picture in front of the goalpost at Sanford Stadium. Everybody does it behind the backdrop in the locker room, the fancy lighting. This guy's outdoors in natural light. It tends to train the eye towards the goal line and the goalpost, like he's going to be in the end zone a lot wherever he goes.
Wow, yeah, that's really... That's a lot of reading into that photo, Jeff. I'm actually really impressed. That's a lot more than I thought we were getting out of an Instagram shot.
I do photos and video also for a living on the side, not just words.
Jeff giving you some symbolism.
But I'm going to say this, and the people need to know.
All of a sudden, it's Ansel Adams taking the picture.
People need to know
Annie
this,
Leibovitz.
Especially on the heels of the gut punch you took from Marshawn Lloyd from Delaware.
Yeah, sure.
Man, LSU seems like a big thing in Kendall Milton's world. If you would look at Elias Ricks, who's the number 2 corner in the now and then country behind Kelee Ringo, and then if those guys that played together in California for years wanted to play together eventually on Saturdays, he is a steadfast LSU commit. Now watch Paris Johnson. Paris Johnson just took his official visit to LSU this weekend. Lots of good vibes came out of Bayou with Paris Johnson, and maybe that combo platter, if LSU can reel in Paris Johnson to go along with Elias Ricks, I think that's something that will give Kendall Milton, who already feels a certain type of way top 4 about LSU, I think that will give him some serious thought.
So apparently for LSU, it doesn't hurt their running back recruitment for 2020 to have signed 2 elite guys for 2019. It's funny how that
Well, they don't have a DeAndre Swift in the mix as well, I would love to see what if he wants to wait and get a little bit knee deep into the season to see what things look like. Imagine if Ty Davis and John Emery both have 650 yards by the midway point or by November. 2 established freshman backs tearing it up for LSU. I think that one might give him some pause as well.
All right, let's keep the pace, try to pick up the pace here a little bit. Name number 3 top targets for 2020. How about a Rick Gilbert, the 5-star from Marietta? And when it comes to in-state names, when it comes to rare athleticism, the tight end position, Gilbert continues to be as important as it gets.
Let me share one nugget here about Gilbert. You've got the situation here where I've been led to believe that Tennessee is recruiting him as a receiver something to think about there. Tennessee is recruiting him as a
Boy,
receiver.
Jeremy Pruitt just makes it up as he goes along, doesn't he?
And why?
He just makes it up as he goes along.
And why would he do that? You know why, right? Why would he not want to? Why would Tennessee and that offensive coordinator not want to recruit Gilbert as a tight end?
Because Jim Chaney ignores tight ends like he ignores diet advice.
A little harsh, my friend. A little harsh. He called a lot of great ball plays.
You started it.
He called a lot of great ball plays for Georgia and a lot of big victories under the Kirby Smart era. I will say this, that's just what you should do. If you're Tennessee and you're under that coaching staff structure, recruit him as a tight end. I know Doug Niedermeyer, who was a great recruiter for Tennessee in the last cycle, is really working hard on Gilbert.
Let me take a brief moment here. Mr. Gilbert, come close to the screen. They also recruited Alontae Taylor as a wide receiver as well. How's that working out?
You're being his inner Obi-Wan
Kenobi
right now,
I'm just
right?
saying, there's certain SEC programs that'll tell you whatever you want to hear when it comes to the position you're going to play.
I think what Georgia's doing is they're saying wait and see, watch James Coley's offense, watch how we feed the ball to the tight end more, and maybe it will be a different look for Georgia on offense for Gilbert to consider.
Next name, let's take a look here. Top targets, how about number 4? 5-star defensive lineman Jordan Birch from Columbia, South Carolina. You caused some ripples on Dog Nation Daily on Friday, showing that on Twitter and social media, Brian Brzee, Clemson itself, really kind of trying to extend that message to Jordan Birch, letting him know there's still room for him as part of this Clemson class. How does that change the equation for Georgia and Birch?
Well, I think here's what I just sense here is happening with Birch. With Birch, it looked like Clemson went all in. You've heard that phrase before, right?
Sure.
Clemson went all in on Miles Murphy and maybe didn't give that same sort of attention and continued treatment towards Jordan Birch. And then maybe Jordan Birch felt a certain type of way about that, which allowed Georgia to get into it a little bit. And now that Miles Murphy is done, or maybe that's just what Clemson was doing because they were closer to a commitment there with Murphy and they wanted to close that things out. Now they come back to Birch and they try to complete the, what is it, superfecta when you get all 5 you want? What is that? You're a horse
I think that is a
racing guy.
superfecta, yeah.
When you try to get all 5 and then now they're saying Jordan Birch is...
Wait, is it superfecta 5? I think it's more like, isn't it 3? It doesn't matter.
Exacta? No, that's 3. But what I would say here's this. Maybe this recruitment might give the target a chance to look at it and see maybe who was there always and who wanted me and who had a time when Clemson wasn't in the picture that really said some things and had some good visits where Georgia, a school like Georgia and South Carolina here with Jordan Birch was able to really make a dividend.
Next name, top targets for 2020. How about Darnell Washington from Las Vegas? Now, Washington this week released a really cool edit for his finalists. I don't typically love double-digit finalists. When you got the Welcome to Las Vegas sign in the background and the finalists are almost like dice being thrown in a craps table, I'm all about this for Mr. Washington here. It's 12 names. That's probably too many. But the edit itself is probably worthy of some congratulations here. I see the roulette wheel in the background. You have to be 21 to get into a casino. Washington isn't old enough to actually enter a casino. But the casino vibe for the edit here, I'm all about that from Darnell.
It is nice. It is creative. I think it was done by Vol Recruiting who did the thing. And I noticed something interesting they did there with the roulette wheel. Normally you would have red and black, right? On the roulette wheel. Could that be a tell? But then you've got a little green space in there as well. You'd love to be able to look in one of the back windows of one of these hotels behind there and see G's or see whatever it may be. But you got 12s, you got dice, you got die as they're called, and I don't think anything, Brandon, can you go CSI on this and determine anything with hierarchy in terms of where the logos are? I guess the logo would be up for Georgia, I guess, a little bit. Is that the way you look at it?
Hard to really get anything too much out of this. Your note about the roulette board is kind of interesting, so difficult to get too much of a read on this, but when you got 12 finalists, you're not going to be able to take too much of a read on any of that anyway. I guess for now, though, Georgia is in this group.
Yeah, Washington has said he's going to make his official visit for the Notre Dame game, which will be interesting. You got a lot of those schools on there.
That's shaping up to be a big visit weekend.
Yeah, you got a lot of schools on there. You got to remember, folks, you can only visit 5. And of those the schools we've seen there, I think he's visited Alabama, he's visited Miami, he's visited Georgia, he's visited Tennessee already on unofficials. There's some schools on there I don't think hadn't had a chance to get into, and I don't think Auburn made that list, even though he'd visited there recently.
All right, so far our top targets pace is slower than Jim Chaney's goal line offense. So let's see if we can pick things up. Name number 6 on the list here. How about Cedric Von Prana in New Orleans? top 8 from Von Braun recently. That's not much better than the top 12, but at least gives you a little insight on where this very highly rated center views his process right now.
Brandon, it's at least 33%
That's
more
a good
precise.
point. I'm not great at math, but even I know that.
33% more precise than Washington's. I think Cedric Von Braun, who I really enjoyed talking to in this class, but he said it best when he's like, Georgia's been there since day one, and they love me, and I like them a lot. So Georgia, I think, is very much in the thick of the things there with Cedric Von Braun.
Well, let's rock it through here. Number 6 on our list. That was number 6. How about number 7? How about Andrew Rame from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, another offensive lineman?
Clear target for Georgia, can play a lot of positions. They look at him and maybe as an Isaiah Wynn mold. Nation's number 3 overall guard prospect out of Oklahoma. Curious, Sam Pittman is also from Oklahoma.
That's right.
Really great film. I love what you see on film here, and I think he is a take should he choose Georgia. Look for Oklahoma there to be a major factor as well.
How about name number 8, top targets of the class of 2020? We do it each week here on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. And a defensive lineman shows up here again, Timothy Smith from Sebastian, Florida. Smith, the second defensive lineman. A lot of the defensive line concerns calmed a bit when Jalen Carter committed, but there's a lot to like about Smith as well, a big guy.
Yeah, one thing we haven't done since, we probably should mention here with Jalen Carter, is his stock continues to soar.
Yeah, he's really climbed.
I think he's the number 2 defensive tackle in the country on the Pure 24/7 Sports rating. A lot of those in-the-know folks on the Dog Nation message board forum seem to think that Georgia will close out 2020 with its best defensive line class haul of the Smart era.
How about Smith, though?
Big guy, 6'4", 320, 330. Weight keeps going up. One of those true inside guys, 0 tech, shade tech, 3 tech, a guy that's going to clog up that middle so those backers can come downhill.
All right, next name on the list, top targets here as we roll on. Number 9, Jacoby Cowan from Charlotte, North Carolina, another defensive lineman.
He was at for the scavenger hunt, really enjoyed it, had some fun trying to figure out a way to win that thing. Jacoby, long relationships there with Trey Scott. I think he can play the 3. He's a DN, D-tackle hybrid for Georgia. I think he's really high on Georgia's board. He talks to Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning and Trey Scott, and I think Jacoby also has Georgia very high on his mind as well.
And finally, number 10, let's see who makes the cut. How about Trenton Simpson from Charlotte, North Carolina? We'll hear from Simpson again later on in the program. But Simpson showing up in the top 10 after, I believe, not being in this spot last week.
Yeah, he moves up. It's one of the I guess ripples of Marshawn Lloyd choosing the South Carolina Gamecocks.
Interesting, no Justin Flo for you. You're going Trenton Simpson over Justin Flo.
I still feel that Simpson, who will likely be a 5-star by the time all the final evaluations are done, I think Simpson is the top inside linebacker target. Laneith Whitehead is another guy to think about there as well. Justin Flo, he's a 5-star, and I think he's still a top 5 prospect in the country.
I think he's number 3 overall.
Yeah, number 3. I think people just need to see with Flo, like he can bruise guys, he can hit like Reuben Foster. But is he the type of elite athlete that Roquan Smith was? No, probably not. But is he an elite athlete like maybe a Channing Tindall? Laneith Whitehead's an elite athlete, and so is Trenton Simpson. I think that's what people need to see there with Justin Flo.
All right, let's see who just missed out on making the cut on this. Now, last week it was like 50 names. This week it looks like it is going to be as well. You got Tank Bigsby, the running back, we talked about briefly a moment ago. Josh Braun, who we highlighted here last week. Flo, we just mentioned. Jay Hardy has gone from a top 12 to a top 16 now, so he's going to go in the wrong direction. Alex Huntley's a high school teammate of Jordan Burge. Nudie McLaughlin, that's his nickname, right?
Yeah.
Paris Johnson, you mentioned, just took a visit to LSU. I guess I should be letting you break all these down. You still got Lloyd on there. I like that.
Yeah, I know.
That's a little different for you. You don't typically put committed players on this list.
Yeah.
I guess you got Paris Johnson there too, although he ain't committed to Ohio State right now.
Clearly, as we discussed. But you look at it, let me take on the last half of that board
Sorry, I'm doing your job for you.
to give you a little bit of pace.
People want to hear
there.
you break this stuff down.
Theo Johnson, you're going to hear an audio interview with him later on the program.
Just a second.
Nation's number 3 tight end, number 1 prospect in Canada from Ontario. Avante Williams, we'll hear about him later on in the show. Laneith Whitehead, Darian Green-Warren. Just spoke to him this weekend at the Pylon 7-on-7s.
That's who Mikal Sherman had mentioned on Twitter the other day.
Yeah, he threw out a shout out to him, but with Darian Green-Warren, it's funny, Georgia only made room at the end, so to speak, to host the visitors on a certain day. James Williams, the 2021 safety, the nation's #1 safety, got one of those visit opportunities. Darian Green-Warren wanted to check out Georgia. There was just no coaches in town to do that, so he didn't take advantage while he was in Atlanta for the Pylon National 7-on-7 to do that. Does really like the Georgia program and the lure of everything right there. He says he's probably going to go check out Georgia now in June. Watch and wait for that, because I don't think he's reached Georgia is going to get an official visit territory as well. And with Georgia only going to take 3 defensive backs in this cycle, at the most 4, something to watch for there.
So that's really interesting with those guys that just missed on the cut of our top targets here for the class of 2020. And here on the program with Jeff Sentell, Dog Nation's recruiting insider, me, Brandon Adams. Let's also mention another one of those names that Jeff just talked about, the #3 tight end in the country, Theo Johnson from Canada. He's a bit of a unique prospect, just given the fact that we don't typically think of Canada being a place that Georgia would go for top prospects, but Theo Johnson sees a lot that he likes about Georgia right now. And it's not necessarily just the trendy stuff or the stuff that players are supposed to like fancy buildings and cool uniforms. No, for him it's about relationships. And for Johnson, it's one name in particular that stands out in terms of why he feels he has a bond with Georgia. Here's what Johnson told Jeff Sentell recently.
One thing I'd say I definitely do like about Georgia, the weather's a lot different than it is up here. It's obviously not something that's going to be a deciding factor, but it's definitely something that I do like. The academics are really good at Georgia. That's one thing that my mom has kind of drilled into my head, that's something that's really important, and that's something that I've been focusing on. And one of the big things for me with Georgia is my relationship with Coach Hartley. I think that's kind of the biggest thing for Georgia. Obviously, Georgia's always going to be a top 10 team. They're always going to be like competing for a national championship, really good team. Like that stuff's all great, but the relationships you have with your players and like the guys on your team and your coaches is really meaningful.
So, listen, there's a lot to like about Johnson as a player, but my favorite thing about him is the fact that he says a boat like the way other Canadians do. He talks about what he likes about Georgia. I just love that. If you're going to get a guy from Canada, he's got to sound like he's from Canada. You know what I'm saying?
He's from Ontario, definitely from Canada.
You want him to sound like he's from Canada, and he does.
Can I get that a boot? Can I get it?
My favorite thing about Georgia.
So he's a nice kid. Really enjoyed talking to him. Look at that one-handed catch.
Yeah,
guys.
it's nice.
I hope you see that. And look, there's no secrecy here at all.
I also like in one of those highlights that you're seeing on video, it's like snowing in September. I mean, like that's the most Canadian thing in the world.
And look at that. They've still got turf fields up there in Canada. You know, they got guys in motion at the snap. They've got, 110 yards.
So they are playing Canadian rule football.
Correct.
So they're playing 110-yard field, and is it like 12 guys on the field?
Look at the deep end zone there, my man. Look at the deep.
It's a 20-yard end zone.
And you've got the goalpost in the middle of the end zone where it creates
Canadian high school football is Canadian professional football. That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, that's going to be in the Theo story about this when you start looking at it. But I really like this young man for a lot of reasons, but look, there's no secrecy about it. Look at him running the ball right there. But there's no secrecy about it with what he's doing. He's lining up as a wide receiver for his team. He's going to get that 9 route. Look at all those deep balls he's catching. Great hands, and he's known Todd Hartley for a long time.
That's very interesting. Let me hear one more about that, where he kind of goes into more detail about why that bond, that relationship with Todd Hartley is so important to him. Here's a little more of Theo Johnson.
I remember alumni from some team, he told me that when you're done playing and you're old and you see your teammates getting married and stuff, you're not going to be talking to your guys about you remember how nice our facilities were? You remember how nice our jerseys were? You're going to be talking about remember that one time we were battling it out fourth quarter in this game, or do you remember that one time we did this? You're going to be remembering about the memories with your players, with the guys, the stuff you're doing. You're going to be remembering that stuff, not about the facilities or all that other stuff. So I think the best thing for Georgia with me is my relationship with Coach Hartley. I have a lot of trust in him, and I feel really comfortable with him.
I think what Johnson says there is really wise. I mean, obviously, I'm not against facilities and building new buildings, but the idea that that's what's going to really win with recruits or going to matter to them years down the road, I don't think that's true. I do think it's the bonds that you form with players and the connection you have with coaches. Position coach in this case, Todd Hartley. I think that's what really matters. And to hear Johnson before he goes into a senior year of high school to be able to articulate that, I think he's really onto something there.
Very worldly kid to make that type of statement. And I'm going to say this. I think when we roll back the time capsules on the 2020 recruiting class, I think I think a lot of folks like me, and maybe we'll be able to show that in our detailed reporting, that we will look back at that G-Day and how it was sort of a dice roll to wait until that last weekend where Georgia was kind of the only, big fish slot, didn't have to compete with the Masters again. It was right before Easter. And that's what I'm talking about, how he spoke about the bonds. Well, all those gentlemen on that field hanging around saying, are you feeling this place? I'm feeling this place. Are you going to go here? I might go here. What are we thinking about here? Is Georgia really in it for you? It's really in it for me. I think that's where all that stuff starts, and that's what Theo Johnson illustrated very well with that point.
If you're just joining us, we're not live today for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Jeff is actually on vacation now as you're watching this broadcast, but he was good enough to stop by the Dog Nation World Headquarters studios on Tuesday. We were able to pre-tape some recruiting thoughts to be able to share this with you here today. We're glad to have you with us nonetheless for the program. By the way, speaking of Kroger, you can get 3 times the fuel points right now on hundreds of items throughout the store, including Kroger ice cream, Beggin' treats for your dogs, Hershey's chocolate syrup, Red Bull, a whole bunch more. So if you're just having a good time celebrating the summer, all those great opportunities, just look for those 3 times the fuel points tags on the aisles there at Kroger. There are hundreds of items you can save on. And if you're getting ready for some summer travel, well, that fuel point savings certainly helps you with that. So check that out at your local Atlanta Kroger. All right, we got 6-pack coming up. Trivia questions. Jeff's going to try to stump me once again. I don't have any audience to help me kind of play along with this today, but much like you do with Jeopardy or something like that, you can play along at home anyway and see how you do with the questions. Jeff will try to stump me in a moment. Before that, though, let's do what I love to do each and every week. I like to call it the online chatter, some of the stuff that you may have missed from the internet. So let's check in on some of that right now when it comes to the latest recruiting news. We mentioned Trenton Simpson a moment ago. Actually, before I get to that, Akiola Gunbi, a UGA commit, really impressive offensive lineman. Well, impressive enough that he's punched his tickets to the opening finals coming up in Frisco later on the summer. He's going to be in Texas there. Good job by Mr. Gunbi.
Yeah, so I think he's going to eventually end up a top 5, top 6, top 7 guard in this class. Remember, folks, he didn't start playing high school football until he was a freshman there in Sugar Land, Texas, and he doesn't get to go far for the opening. He just has to go from like the Houston metro area to the Dallas metro area in Frisco there. But nonetheless, he's excited to compete among the nation's best right there. Akiola Gunbi really feels a certain type of way about Georgia. Been that way for a while, actually.
Trenton Simpson made our top 10 targets this week, and he's also punched his opening ticket as well. You said, you talk about the potential of being a 5-star, the potential of really climbing those ranks. It's easy to understand why Georgia has him on its radar because of the kinds of performances he's shown in these qualifier events thus far this summer.
Yeah, with Trenton, the neat thing about him is maybe 6 months ago, a lot of schools were figuring out, now is he a linebacker or is he a running back? Is he an athlete? What is he? Trenton has established that he wants to be a linebacker, an inside linebacker on Saturdays. Really interesting watching him. He tested well. I still think, as I said earlier in the show, I think Simpson could end up cracking that 5-star status there because of his all-around skill set. Mallard Creek High School, Brandon, tell the folks out there what Mallard Creek means to the Georgia football program.
That is the school that gave you Jordan Davis, is that right?
So yeah. He's gotten some good intel about the Georgia program from Jordan. One more thing to think about there. If you'd have asked folks back on March 15th whether Georgia had a shot with Trenton Simpson, most probably would have said no. Maybe even Trenton Simpson might have even said no. But Georgia accelerated the pace through the end of March. In April, he was there for G-Day, and Georgia did make his top 4.
All right, let's take a look at Miles Slusher here, who was celebrating on Twitter this week the fact that he got a UGA offer. Now, Slusher is an Oregon commit, is that right?
Just committed to Oregon at the end of April, and it's kind of funny how the dice changes where it's kind of, we were kidding before our show, it's like you have everything all figured out, and then all of a sudden a more attractive potential suitor shows up, and Miles Slusher, friends with Jalen Kimber. Jalen mentioned him in our interview earlier in this show, and nation's number 14 safety, committed to Oregon right now, but Georgia is now in the mix for Miles Slusher with that offer. And obviously, Jalen Kimber is going to be tugging on him, say, hey, just give us a shot. Mm-hmm. Let us see what Georgia can do for you. Let us see how you feel about Georgia.
And Slusher goes to the same high school in Broken Arrow that Andrew Rame goes to, is that right?
Correct, another Oklahoma prospect.
How about James Williams, also talking about his recent visit to the University of Georgia? You briefly referenced Williams a little earlier in the show. That's actually Tay Williams right there. But James Williams was on the Georgia campus not too long ago.
Yeah, and man, folks, I'm going to write about him sometime soon. Hopefully I can do it before I vacate. But James Williams, not quite 6'5". He says, man, I'm 6'4" and some change, 218. You will believe. You remember those old Superman movies where the headline was "You will believe a man can fly"? Mm-hmm. That was like the poster on the Hollywood thing, and that goes back to 1980, I guess, or something like that. But most people won't get that. But if you do remember, you will believe a 6'4.5" kid can play safety. I saw him at the Pylon this weekend. I think he made 3 interceptions in 99-degree heat, ranging. He was working in the slot. He was working up. Georgia really will prioritize him after he recently decommitted from Miami. The nation's #1 safety out of South Florida goes to Brandon. I know more symmetry here.
Wow.
Goes to American Heritage in Plantation.
A school that's produced Sony Michel and Marshawn Morgan and Isaiah McKenzie too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guess what? Potentially, you forgot your cover boy for the 2018 recruiting class.
Oh, that's right, Tyson Campbell. My fault, young man.
Little note here on Tyson Campbell. Perhaps one of the things that makes Brandon's heart warm about Tyson Campbell is he's already in James's ear telling him to come to Georgia.
There you go.
Come to Georgia, come to Georgia.
So he's clearly happy with where he is. Another school, in addition to American Heritage down in Plantation, Florida, that's been good to Georgia, is Hateville Charter. And a young man from Hateville Charter also recently made some news as well. Tell us a little bit more about Tajiri Smith here.
Yeah, so this is the little brother, younger brother, I wouldn't call him so much little, of Chris Smith.
Is that right? Well, good for him.
And
How about that?
This kid,
I should have put 2 and 2 together.
if you ask the Hustle Incorporated family about their most valuable players, and somehow they go in and win Cam Newton's tournament every year when Cam's got like 3 or 4 teams in there. But if you ask the people, the brain trust of that operation, they might think that Chris Smith's little brother, let's go ahead and just call him TJ Smith, is as important to their team, maybe their most valuable player, because what he does is he just shuts folks down. If we look back at that tweet, I want to pull it up, in the Cam Newton Memorial Day Classic this past weekend, look at that, no completions allowed.
Good for him.
Nickel corner.
Yeah.
2 more things I want to tell you about TJ Smith. You're going to like him. Number 1, he's going to take an official visit to Memphis. Michigan State is also gotten in the mix there. And Charlton Warren has had a conversation with Mr. Smith, and he said, you know what? Come to camp. I want to see what you can do. I want to take a really good look at you.
Well, if he's got his brother's work ethic, he's going to be impressive, because the one thing about Chris is he's never been the biggest guy, but as you said, in a game situation or an intense competitive camp situation, Chris Smith's going to bring the fight to anybody. He just is.
And TJ's the same way. There is a lot of dog in this young man. I don't mean that in red and black dog, but he is a fighter. We watch him compete in these 7-on-7s. It is very rare for the guys he's guarding him after games or even after series to slap him on the back and say, good coverage, man, good work. Thanks for helping me getting better. He's got the respect of a lot of people that follow this industry closely, and I'm telling you, Brandon, if he was about 6'1", 6'2", he would be in 5-star territory, I think,
that's great
because of the way he plays.
That's great to hear. One more name to give you. We talked about Miles Slusher being an Oregon commit before. What's going on with Alante Williams here as well? Now, there's a lot of chatter coming out of Florida on him, but he's also, I guess, reaffirming his pledge to the Ducks here?
So he was for the scavenger hunt, and Georgia's likely going to get official visits from Tay Williams, but look what he did on social media recently. His own online chatter is he retweeted his commitment way back months ago to Oregon, and he put that still committed thumbs up sign as well, which tends to let folks think that if you're going to flip him, you might want to try to use both hands to try and flip Avante Williams. I think he is a great player. I've been watching him since Richard LeCount was still in high school. Everybody pointed to him. Tyreek Johnson said this kid is going to be the next dog, the next beast coming out of South Florida. Georgia likes him as a corner. He's rated as a safety. He can kind of play all around, and Charlton Warren has told him that he can kind of play in a lot of spaces and cross-train in a lot of spots for Georgia.
All right, so that's really good stuff. Online chatter, incredible notes from Jeff. Hitting it hard here before he goes on vacation. We appreciate that. Now it's time for our weekly six-pack. Jeff likes to share it each week. Normally I lean on the audience for help on this. If you're just joining us, we are pre-recording this show today, so you won't be able to interact with us now, but you can play along and you can put your answers in the comment section just like always, and we'll trust in the honor system to see if we get them right or wrong on that. But Jeff, the floor is yours for one more chance to stump us before you head towards vacation.
So I want Brandon at the end of this segment to give me a mind-blown emoji or something like that. Because here's what we did. We put our thinking caps on, and we're like,
oh no.
Okay, this stuff's not going to be live, so how can we make this a challenge? a labyrinth, so to speak, for people to play along. And I want you to call upon, me being a literary fella,
Okay.
all those old choose your own adventure books.
Oh no, this is
From-
going to be so complicated.
Choose
Oh,
your
my
own
gosh.
adventure. No. We have the flavor of that, but what we're doing is this is a thing for curious minds, Brandon. I want you to think about the game everybody's played. Would you rather?
Okay. All right.
That's enough of a tease.
All right.
This man's going to love it.
All right, here we
We're
go.
going to get into it.
Here we go.
Number one, let's use one of Eddie's hidden talents and magically grant one of these Bulldogs a 1,000-yard season in 2019.
Okay.
Who would you rather it be?
Okay.
Jeremiah Holloman, George Pickens, Zamir White, or Demetrius Robertson?
Okay. Ooh. So I feel like the best answer for Georgia is either Pickens or Demetrius Robertson. I'll tell you why. You already know what J.J. Holloman is. You know he's a very good receiver. If you could wave a magic wand and give him 1,000 yards, that doesn't tell me anything about his complementary pieces. I can already pencil Holloman in this year for that sort of 600 or 700 yard range. I feel like that's a given. So if I can give 1,000 to a D-Rob or a Pickens, that's a much bigger advantage for Georgia. Now, Zamir White, I don't feel like I need a magic wand to give him 1,000. I think he's going to have a good season. 1,000 yards may be too much, but nonetheless, it's going to be a good season. But you've got some depth at the running back, some known commodities there that I don't think you have at the receiver position. So it comes down to a D-Rob or a Pickens. I'm going to give it to Pickens. Lining up as the outside guy, I'm going to give it to Pickens. If George Pickens gets 1,000 yards receiving, Georgia, listen, watch my lips, I am not stuttering. Georgia will win the national championship. If Georgia gets 1,000-yard season out of a guy like Pickens, or really a 1,000-yard season for many of its receivers, but a guy like Pickens in particular, it will win the national championship.
Man, Brandon, that was very well said.
That's all I need to know.
You framed that thought so well. You brought it all to the table. You said to read my lips. You called upon George W. Herbert Walker Bush on that.
Bush
I was
41.
waiting for you to think about 1,000 points of light, maybe 1,000 yards of receiving for George Pickens.
Yeah.
But agree to disagree. That was not my answer. That was not my answer, sir. Let's give him a buzzer for that, Connor. Dude, your transitive property there for Holloman and the rest of the receivers, if Zamir White is over 1,000 yards, then the Bulldog offense might rush for 3,000 yards in 2019.
Okay, but the only thing I'm going to push back on is I'd love to see it. But they ran for almost 3,000 yards last year, and they didn't make the college football playoff. So just giving Georgia rushing yards doesn't necessarily give them what they haven't had yet.
If Zamir gets 1,000 yards, that means Zamir is unleashed and full tilt. And if Zamir can get 1,000 and he's cleared and good to go to get 1,000, I think Zamir might roll up 1,300.
I'm certainly excited to see it. Certainly excited to see it.
I do like your answer, though. You really passionately brought that in there.
That's good to know.
So, like we said, that's a choose-your-own-adventure answer, but Brandon found his way to paradise, it sounded like, with George Pickens on that George Pickens hype train. I went with Zamir White because that means great things are happening. Number 2. This wouldn't get you.
All right, here we go.
Which player would you rather have a breakthrough season to vault to the top of NFL draft boards at their position? A, DeAndre Swift. Probably know your opinion on that one. B, Jeremiah J.J. Holloman. C, Matt Landers. D, Eric Stokes. And E, Ben Cleveland. Here's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
First rounder.
Okay, so, I mean, I hate to say this for Mr. Cleveland. I sort of hope that doesn't happen because I want him to come back next year. The best answers, though, are probably one of two things. It's either Eric Stokes, because if you get Stokes in this position, Georgia can call itself, I don't want to say DBU because that's too much hype, but if you have a Baker one year and you have Stokes the next year, neither of which were former 5-star recruits, neither of which really former elite recruits, then Georgia's branding as a defensive back recruiter has enhanced itself mightily. But I'm also in favor of the pipeline continuing to move through. I want to see guys, come in, learn for a year, develop for a year, and then dominate for a year. DeAndre Swift would have a chance to do some version of that. So in terms of keeping the 2020 door open for elite running backs, having DeAndre Swift really pop this year would help with that regard. So for me, it's either Stokes or Swift, and I guess I'll probably say Swift. It'd be nice to put him in New York. That's another pretty good characteristic for a team that could be heading for some championship success. I think Swift's my name here.
So a thought here, where you're going with DBU, like what if Georgia became Jim Thorpe Award winner U? That might be a way to look at that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't think the Kelee Ringos of the world or the 2021 versions of that guy, they wouldn't be paying attention to that? Because the one thing that, I don't mean to hijack the conversation here, but the one thing that these knucklehead opposing fans love to do is they say, Kirby can recruit, but can he develop talent? If DeAndre Baker goes on to do what he's done, if Eric Stokes is in the process of going on to do what he's done, it gets a little bit harder to nail Kirby with the "Are you a developer of talent?" moniker. It gets a little harder to do that if he's putting 3 stars in the league.
So let me look at this. Let's pull up the list one more time, and I'm going to walk you through the thinking here for my answer to this question.
By all means.
Number one, I think DeAndre Swift is already going to be at the top of draft boards at their position.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I hope he is, but I mean, running backs don't get drafted in the first round a ton.
Well, I would say if he puts up a 1,400, 1,300-yard season, then he becomes a first, second-round back, which is what a top of the NFL back stratosphere does. Jeremiah J.J. Holloman, you pencil him in for those 600, 700, 800 receiving yards, but I don't know if he's seen as a first-round receiver.
Probably
yet.
not right now. I've seen him at least one mock draft, but not right now.
Matt Landers, that would be a huge leap for him to become a first-round pick. That
Maybe
would
too much of a leap to have a realistic conversation about.
Eric Stokes, I like what you're cooking right there with Eric Stokes, and then Ben Cleveland. Ben Cleveland, if he's a first-rounder at guard this year where he stabilizes things, that could mean Georgia would have maybe 3 offensive linemen go in the top 2 rounds. My answer, though, I went back to one of the names I already mentioned. I mentioned Jeremiah J.J. Holloman, because if Holloman to go from it's his time to shine status to a first-round draft target after his junior year would mean he absolutely went bonkers in 2019.
And it also fits into what we said before about the Stokes, the Bakers, truly developed talent. You would say the same thing about Holloman in that case. This is a guy that came in, and Georgia got more out of him than the recruiting profile sort of suggested.
Remember, number 20 overall receiver, I think maybe 22, 24, in that range. Also did not play at all, barely his freshman year at all. And then all of a sudden, look at that growth he made in his sophomore year, and then the growth he would make to go to a number 1 draft pick status. I know that would definitely tickle the hearts and minds of a lot of Georgia football fans.
Yeah, for sure.
That young man is a bona fide, wonderful first-class ambassador of the Georgia football program.
I would have also accepted Richard LeCount in this conversation. I would have accepted him as a potential, and y'all don't sleep. I know there's some knocks on LeCount out there. Don't sleep on him having the kind of massive development type year that you just described.
We got some more conversation to go here, sir.
All right.
Our third one, and our would you rathers. Which one of these Bulldogs would you rather see in New York for the 2019 Heisman Trophy Awards banquet? A. Jake Fromm, B. D-Rob, C. DeAndre Swift, or D. Brian Harrion?
So I'd take all 4, but let me keep it to the 2 most likely for right now. Fromm or Swift. I feel like that Georgia may be one of the few schools left that can still have a Heisman running back, just because this has become such a quarterback's award, with apologies to Derrick Henry, who won it in 2015. This has really become a quarterback's award as of late. To see Georgia honored for its RBU heritage would be really cool, but when you look at what Heisman quarterbacks have been the last few years, Tua Tagovailoa didn't win the award, but was the favorite for the award for most of the season, more than 11 yards per attempt. Kyler Murray, more than 11 yards per attempt. Go back to Baker Mayfield after the 2017 season. Massive, massive productivity. If Jake Fromm is a Heisman-level quarterback, assuming it's not just a token for being the best player on the so-called best team, that's a level of performance for Georgia unlocked that we haven't seen in the Kirby Smart area up to this point in time. So it would be better for Georgia if Fromm is the Heisman finalist, and yet for someone like me who grew up with these great first-round level running backs, in some cases Heisman finalist running backs for Georgia, Garrison Hurst in '92 comes to mind here. I'd love to see Swift be that guy. It'd be better for Georgia though to have a Heisman quarterback.
So here's what I'm thinking. We call up those names one more time, and let's just sandbox this one for a little bit. Brandon, for Fromm to be in the Downtown Athletic Hub in New York, which the ceremony is obviously after, the voting is after the SEC championship game. That to me would mean Georgia is either undefeated, an SEC champion, and you would have to look at Fromm's numbers, and they would be something like 70%, 3,400 yards, 35 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, something like that.
Yeah.
The leader of the program.
Like I said, about 11 yards per attempt is what it's taking you to get to New York as a quarterback.
So you got those names right there. I think there's really just 2 names in this one. You take Demetrius out, you take Brian Harrion out, because Georgia's season would go off script if either of those guys are in the Downtown Athletic Club for the Heisman balloting. And it really comes down to 2 names. My choice here was DeAndre Swift. Simply put, I'm going to accept DeAndre Swift here with our answer, or I'm going to accept Jake Fromm with your answers, because I think either or, if one of those 2 is in New York for that Heisman ceremony, then that means the Georgia football season went exactly according to script.
I think that's certainly a fair point to bring up.
And did we even pop the answer up there for folks that are following at home or got the mute button on? Yep. If the answer is Swift, it means a great many things have happened and gone according to plan. We will even accept a Jake Fromm answer.
Very nice. Very nice. How about number 4?
That makes you what? 1 for 3, but your first one was so compelling.
My score is whatever you want it to be, Chuck.
Number 4. Which one of these Bulldogs would you rather see honored with a postseason national award? Jake Fromm is your Davey O'Brien. Rodrigo Hot Rod Blankenship is your Lou Groza. DeAndre Swift is your Doak Walker. Andrew Thomas is your Outland Trophy Award winner. Or Charlie freaking Warner is your John Mackey Award winner.
I'd love to see all of these. They'd be great. I just made my case for why a great year for Fromm means more for Georgia than virtually any other position. I'm going to give you a different answer this time just to kind of break things up. We were at a broadcast a couple years ago. We had a chance to talk to Andrew Thomas. Of course, you knew him well. But I remember this young man when he was, before he even got to Georgia, to think that guy over the course of 3 years could become an Outland Trophy winner, that'd be one of the coolest moments for me in Dog Nation history, to see that young man go on to that great level of success. He's such a dignified representative of Georgia. The Outland Trophy, such a big deal because guys on both sides of the ball are eligible for the award. It's one of the harder awards to win. I'm gonna give my nod to Thomas here. That would just, first of all, it's a cool sounding trophy, the Outland Trophy. It sounds like a football thing. Andrew is just a really cool dude. I would love to see Andrew. Look, it looks like he's looking at you right now. I would love.
So you better pick me, Brandon. You better pick me.
I would love for Andrew Thomas to win the Outland Trophy.
So you watch those highlights, especially those game clips, and the story that always comes to mind is that story about Andrew Thomas. And when he's standing straight up, he can scratch his kneecaps.
Yeah.
That's how long his arms are. Let's pull up the contenders here again, and I'm going to roll through the thought process.
While you're doing that, Sam Pittman deserves an Outland Trophy winner, too. For a guy that's recruited that well, he deserves to have one of his guys get their name on a trophy.
What about that Joe Moore award winner, too? But you look through these.
That don't mean nothing to me. Oklahoma won that thing last year.
Jake Fromm is your Davey O'Brien. I think that can happen. Rodrigo Lou Groza, that can happen. DeAndre Swift at Doak Walker Award, that can happen. Andrew Thomas is your Outland Trophy Award winner. I think that can happen, Brandon. The one thing that would boggle my mind, if Georgia has the John Mackey Award winner, what happens if Charlie Warner has 50 catches and 800 yards and 10 touchdowns in the Georgia offense?
Be awesome.
To me, Charlie Warner is your John Mackey Award winner. If the talented Warner breaks all the way out as the Mackey winner, then it will mean great things. Hello, Eric Gilbert, for Fromm, UGA, and the future of the tight end room in Athens.
Feels like a little too much wishful thinking. Even for someone like me who trades in wishful thinking, that feels like a little too wishful.
So your would you rathers, though, man, if Charlie Warner goes from that in Chaney's offense to that in Coley's offense, that will be noticed.
I mean, I would rather it rain chocolate syrup, but I mean, that doesn't mean it's going to.
We're playing would you rather, sir, and a lot of those are more certainties than the other one. Moving right along, I think these last two will be your questions. Who would you rather the Bulldogs face in the SEC championship game?
I can tell you right now, this is a very easy question for me to answer.
Alabama, Auburn, Texas A&M, LSU, or Ole Miss?
I want Alabama. Now, there are a lot of those opponents that will be a lot easier games for Georgia, and that's fine. I think there's a chance that LSU is a bigger threat in the West this year than some people realize, which is a bridge to cross if you get there. Georgia's got some revenge stuff on the line against LSU the next time they play. But the country wants to see Georgia back in this spot, getting over the hump, toppling the Nick Saban regime. That's what needs to happen for Georgia. It's the toughest possible matchup. It's the one that Georgia needs. Much like Luke Skywalker had to face Darth Vader, Kirby Smart's got to face his old nemesis. You've got to bring down Saban. Georgia must play Alabama. I'll be disappointed if they don't.
So the third time, in the third movie, that's when Vader was taken down by Luke, correct?
Exactly.
Let's roll through them. Brandon and I, can we give him a bell? Because he hasn't gotten a bell yet today, sir. That answer, it has to be Georgia has to slay that dragon.
Yeah,
Georgia has to knock down.
I don't want an easy game. Now, I do think that LSU is more realistic than some people realize. My pick would be Alabama. I believe LSU is more realistic than some people realize. Nonetheless, Georgia needs to play Alabama.
So look at the clarifier. As much as the world would like to see Ole Miss and the degree of difficulty lowered by that pairing, it likely has to be Alabama or LSU.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Ole Miss couldn't make the MAC championship game.
Number 6, Matt Corral. Maybe he plays out of his mind, man. Number 6, which 2 teams would you rather the Bulldogs face in the college football playoffs? A, Alabama and Oklahoma.
Okay.
B, Clemson and Alabama. C, Washington and Ohio State. Or D, Ohio State and Alabama. There's a familiar theme running through a lot of these.
Yeah, there is, although you didn't give me the choice I would have taken. If you give me my choice of who I would take, Clemson's definitely one of mine. I don't think it's fair to Georgia to have to ask them to play Alabama twice in the same season. Rematches always favor the team that lost game 1. That's just a statistical fact. I would have taken Clemson and Oklahoma because, let's face it, I mean, I'm not looking to go down the Justin Fields road unless Georgia just absolutely has to. It'd be a fascinating game, but fascinating in some cases for the wrong reasons. So I'm not going to say Fields unless it's just a requirement for winning a national championship. If you give me my choice, though, I loved how Georgia and Oklahoma fared against each other in the Rose Bowl. That would be a ton of fun, and it's got to be Clemson because I'm so tired of them on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, so what I was looking at there is I kind of was thinking the way I look at the SEC West standings to sort out this year is I thought LSU might be the contender that makes it to the game, actually. Mm-hmm. And then Alabama, of all things, you know, if Alabama's even close and they're not the SEC West champion, they find a way to stick them in the Final Four. We've seen it happen time and time again already with Alabama. The answer here, Brandon was on it, though. He said Clemson and Alabama.
Well, I said Clemson and Oklahoma. That wasn't one of the choices.
You changed it, but then you said, and B, this is what we deem Dog Nation hopes to see. If you don't get Alabama in the SEC championship game, you would likely have to see them.
If somehow they missed the SEC championship, they'll obviously get a free pass to the playoff. At that point in time, then Georgia's going to vanquish that foe right there.
So there you go. We did a would you
rather.
All 6? Would you rather vacation edition, sir?
All right, really good stuff. Jeff, we know you're getting ready to go on vacation. Thank you so much for stopping by, giving us some really good recruiting information. What a great way to send us out on. Of course, Dog Nation is going to have you covered with all the information. Jeff won't be here, but I'm not going anywhere. We'll still have Dog Nation Daily each and every day, and we'll look forward to catching up with you on a live version of one of our shows again very soon, too. And we're going to hear from you on next week's edition of Before the Hedges, but that'll be just kind of short and just kind of sweet.
What I would say here is that every time I go on vacation in the summer, good news usually happens for Georgia. So, hey, everybody's going to come up with those jokes. Whenever Jeff or Brandon or someone goes on vacation, they get a commitment, something wonderful happens, and then they're like, let's start a GoFundMe to keep Jeff in Italy for all time.
Well, we will be watching to see that. That's Jeff Sintel. I'm Brandon Adams. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for Dog Nation Daily Live. Jeff will see you here again soon. Huge thanks to Kroger for making all this possible. Before the Hedges by Kroger, presented by Kroger each week, Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again next week at this same time.